All right, here we go. First lesson for U.S. wars. Starting into World War I, the Great War. So, if you're looking at the slide here, and you've probably heard these phrases before when we're referring to World War I. World War I is the war to end all wars, or the Great War. And well, that's the idea. When the people living there were going through this war, it was the worst war ever to happen in human existence, without really anything coming really close to the devastation this war brought about. Hence they called it the Great War. And then towards the end of it, they're thinking there's no way anybody will ever want to go to war again after this. Of course, we know that's one of the most made fun of quotes of all time because, well, World War II was just 20 years later and arguably 5 times worse. So that being said, though, just getting into just the basics of World War I, just some of just introducing it in a way so that you have a good idea of where we're starting off with and where we're going, because we're going to get fairly in depth as we go through many of the lessons on World War I in this class. So, this is a bit of an overview. Here's a map of Europe during World War I. Now, notice, there's a map of Europe during World War I. We call this World War I, but it's really just like the big European war. World War II is where we really see the entire world getting into it, especially when you get Japan and China involved. Oh, sorry, I don't mean to confuse you right now. Again, World War I is more just a European war, but it did involve fighting around the world, although a lot of the aspects of it was the world coming into Europe to fight because these empires are pulling so many resources and especially men into the trenches of World War I. And yeah, just bad times. But basics, every country you see there listed in green are what are known as the Allied nations. The countries listed in purple are known as the Central Powers. And then the ones in yellow are the countries that, at least when it came to the combat, were able to stay away from it. But it's hard to stay out of, at least be untouched by a devastation like this. So, now, who are the combatants, essentially? So World War I combatants, looking at the Central Powers first. Okay. So, the main power for the Central Powers is Germany. Like the other ones I'm about to bring up, like Austria-Hungary, Ottoman Empire, and Bulgaria, well, Germany was the big dog. And okay, depending on how you want to look at this, yes, there was tons of people that threw in everything they had with the other countries, but when it came down to it, Germany basically had to guide the other three to just kind of just dragging them along through World War I. In fact, in most cases, all three of those armies had a lot of Germans coming in to help them out with organization and training. And many of those armies, especially when we talk about, say, armies like the Ottoman Empire and the Austrian army, the Austrian-Hungarian army, I should say, do incredibly well once they get the Germans in there helping them out. They did not fare so well when they just tried to go into it all by themselves, and Germany pretty much had to come and just dig them out. And the fact that Germany was digging these guys out in many cases while still fending off the massive powers of, well, the other guys we're going to be talking about, the big three, Great Britain, France, and Russia, well, that's pretty big. So I should say pretty impressive. I don't know if you want to say impressive about the idea that we're talking about one of the worst things ever to happen in world history. But anyways, please get this down as well. Main Allied powers, Great Britain, France, and Russia, known as the Big Three. And when it comes down to it, World War I, really a lot of times does come down to Great Britain, France, and Russia versus Germany. I mean, that's not completely fair to say, but they're considered the big dogs on this. And in that way, it seems like a 3 versus 1. And it seems like this should have just been an Allied victory right from the get-go. I mean, all throughout the war, it just seemed like, okay, now the Allies might be able to win. But man, Germany really stuck it in there. There's a lot of times where it seemed like Germany was almost going to win. And it was a huge back and forth. But other Allied nations you need to know, and this is part of the reason why people say, well, why didn't the Allies just win? It seems like they had everybody on their side. Serbia, arguably the country that you could say started the war, although again, not completely fair to say, but between them and Austria-Hungary, yeah. You get Montenegro, Belgium, and Portugal. These are the countries that are just right there at the very beginning, you could say. yes, there's a process of events and who declares war on who and just da-da-da-da-da, but we'll go over that one later. At least we consider the beginning of the war. Here are your allied nations. Now, nations that join the Allies later on. Notice I didn't really have that for the Central Powers, and I apologize. You do need to know the Ottoman Empire and Bulgaria do join in later in the war, at least for the Central Powers. I probably should have mentioned that. I guess I think it's a little bit more notable with the Allies because you get a lot of people joining with the Allies, and even with everybody joining in, it wasn't until you get down to about the United States when it just really made the difference. But man, we get in really late into this thing. And when we learned about World War I in our U.S. history classes, we kind of talked about the idea like, well, sometimes it feels like we were there almost the whole time, where it didn't really get started until we got there. Definitely not the case with this war. So, but countries need to know, Italy, a huge contributor to World War I in the idea of like they thought they could turn the tide. Not really. But man, they threw their weight into it pretty good. Romania came in. Man, every time I talk about Romania and World War I just feel so bad for them. They just get rolled over. Japan. Japan is one of the few countries that comes out of World War I in a way unscathed and much better off. Everybody else is just destroyed. And they're like, we got something out of this and we didn't really lose anything. Which, of course, if you're thinking about Doom 2 equaling 4, helps lead into Japan being the major power it was going into World War II, which again we'll talk about much later in this class. So Greece comes in and the United States come in 1917. Although the United States doesn't see like massive action. I shouldn't say massive action. Well, we don't get all of our people in there. We do like to think that we're one of the major countries that really turns this war around. There's a lot of factors in there, but yes, that is very fair to say that we really do help turn this war into a definite allies were going to win this. Now, if you're thinking I just gave things away, I kind of hope you know the Allies win this one. But man, it was a drawn-out thing, and, well, in the end, it's one of those ideas where just, did it matter who won or lost because of everything that was lost overall? And that brings us in, like all the people we lost and the destruction that happened. That's going to bring us in this next slide. We call this the war to end all wars, mainly because no one thought we could see this much death and destruction. Just to give you a little bit of a background into this, there's been wars all throughout world history. But speaking in European terms, you do have some wars where you get some really big ones where, in this one battle you had that lasted maybe a couple days, 50,000 people died. And that was just a travesty, but it was just that one battle at that one time. Most of the time when you get battles and skirmishes throughout European history, it was a really bad battle and we lost 200 guys. Or we lost 3,000. That's really bad. When you get those huge numbers, like especially in Napoleonic times, in the tens of thousands, man, that's unthinkable. There's no way things could get worse than how many people died in the Napoleonic Wars of the late 17 and early 1800s. And then throughout the 1800s themselves, all the wars that happened between the Europeans, there's some pretty nasty affairs, like say the Crimean War. But the death counts weren't astronomical. They weren't like the Napoleonic Wars, essentially. And in a way, people were feeling like, well, maybe we got a handle on this. Wars is just kind of a nice little political toy. And some people die, but it's not a big deal. Well, this changed everything. Just to kind of put these up there. So, Belgium, by the way, these are deaths. These, as far as I understand, got these numbers off of Wikipedia. Sorry, probably could have gone to other sources, but anyways, I imagine they're giving us fairly good numbers, at least roundabout numbers. So Belgium loses 38,000. British Empire, nearly 1 million. Again, these are deaths. This isn't including wounded or people affected in really adverse ways. These are deaths. When you get to these numbers like almost 1 million, and then France almost 1.3 million, almost 1.4 million, like again, these numbers just didn't make sense. It just numbs the mind. And as people were living through this, it just death after death after death. It's almost like they got used to it. You read through some of these journals, and let's just say, I personally never want to have that mindset. of a lot of the journals that I had to read through when it comes to World War One. But I'll just keep bringing these up. Greece, 26,000. Italy, 650,000. Portugal, just 7,200. But they didn't mobilize as many people. So you could say they got out a little bit unscathed. Romania, man, that was like their entire army. I know it's not their entire army, but like I said earlier, they just get rolled over, and you feel really bad for the Romanians in World War One. But at the same time, they didn't need to get involved either. We'll cover that one later. But yeah, so Russia, we just don't know how many people died. That's military deaths, and it's just a rounded out number at 2 million. Could be more, could be maybe a little less, most likely more. Just tough times. Serbia and Montenegro together lose that many. Like, think about how many soldiers are actually in the field if you have this many dying and they're still going. It's a bit unfathomable. United States, again, more of a assertive number, meaning a to-the-point number. And we actually mobilize nearly 1.5 million men for World War I, but only about approximately 450,000 actually saw combat, which means that we lost nearly 1 out of every 4 soldiers in World War I for the short period of time we were involved in it. So this is quite a devastating war, even for us. Although much worse for countries like Britain, France, Britain, and Russia, though. Okay, and Austria, and the Ottomans. Oh, sorry. Total Allied deaths, sorry about the thing there. But moving on, we got Austria-Hungary. They lost almost 1.2 million. Again, a rounded out number. Bulgaria, 87,000. Germany, 1.7 million. Again, a lot. And Ottoman Empire, about 800,000. Again, so of all the combatants in World War I, you have this many that essentially lost their lives. And unfathomable, people look at this, and it's just even hard, it's mind-numbing to see these type of numbers, especially coming out of just not seeing numbers like this. You know, today we've seen numbers like this starting with World War I, and some of us are like, oh, wow, that's bad, but I've read about this before. Well, they hadn't. Like, they didn't think this was possible. Heck, I hope this is never, ever possible again, but again, mind-numbing. Now, going into it, overall military deaths for the war, somewhere between 8 to 10 million, we think, overall. Okay, could be more, could be a little less, but there's the range for you. This next number I'm going to bring up, though, is just everybody that is really directly affected. It doesn't show everyone, but, well, here we go. Basically, casualties. Casualties is a term that refers to the idea of everybody who died. They're missing in action, wounded in some way, shape, or form, and then the number I'm going to give you is just both civilian and military. All the numbers I've shown you so far are just military. I didn't include in civilian there because those numbers aren't, well, we don't have as good a number for civilian deaths, especially in places like Russia. But the estimated number of people affected in this way, again, dead, wounded, missing in action, just directly affected by this, in their personal, to their person, you could say, 40 million. Now, the population of Europe alone at this time period is somewhere between 450 and 500 million people. If it's in there, we're talking about 1 out of every 10 to 12 people is a casualty of World War I. Again, it's unfathomable. That is mind-numbing. It is understandable what they thought this was the war to end all wars. And with that, I'm going to leave it here. This is the first lesson, but we move on to the next one where we talk about what caused all of this.